Hi everybody, Cassandra Bibas here, your Fear to Fuel expert and life transitions coach. I want to talk today about tough times. Have you ever heard the saying that says, tough times don't last, but tough people do? Like, you hear that saying? Tough times don't last, but tough people do. I have mixed feelings about that saying. I have super mixed feelings because if you are like me and you've ever been through a tough time, when you're going through it and you're in the midst of it, the last thing you want to hear anybody tell you is, tough times don't last, but tough people do. So what I want to talk today about is tough times and your fear. Because oftentimes fear creeps up when you start to go through things that you never expected to go through. You start to experience traumas, dramas, breakups, makeups, accidents. I can just go on the list of the amount of tough times. For example, I never expected to have a baby premature. I never expected to have 2 weeks of bed rest in the hospital and then the baby going transverse and almost having to be delivered by C-section. And then at the last hour, turning around again and then coming out and having jaundice and having to stay in the hospital 2 weeks. Like, if you told me at the beginning of that pregnancy that that's what I would be going through, I'd be like, no, that's not going to happen. But it did happen. And then 3 months later, after I had my second child, he was back in the hospital again, almost to the point of death, almost blew. So that was an example of a seriously tough time. And what I learned through that experience, so having a premature baby when you didn't expect to, and then 3 months later being right back in the hospital with that baby, having to watch that child go through a spinal tap. Can you imagine? Yeah, hard. What I learned in that really tough time is not that tough times don't last, but tough people do, because after that, there were many tough times that happened in different situations of my life. That's not what I learned. What I learned was that every tough situation is a spiritual classroom. Everything that we go through is designed to give us instruction in areas that we need instruction. And so one of the worst things we can do is succumb to fear in a tough situation and fight the lesson. Fighting the lesson doesn't work, and let me tell you why. When you fight the lesson, it may end the classroom that you're in right then and there. But guess what? The classroom comes back in a different form, a different situation, at a later time, with a different person. You still got to learn the lesson. So what I always say is, I would really like to not repeat the spiritual sixth grade a 50th time. So for me, the biggest opportunity here is to focus in any tough situation, not on the fact that I'm a tough person who's going to last longer than the tough situation. Because you know what? For some people, tough situations last decades. Talk to somebody who's gone through cancer. Talk to somebody who's gone through the grief of losing children. Ask them 5 years later if tough people last longer than tough situations, and they won't have a fabulous answer for you. You know why? Because sometimes tough situations last a very long time. What am I telling you? Your fear can be your fuel. Your fear can be the thing that you transform into courage, but you've got to know how to use it. And in a tough situation, one thing you've got to remember is sometimes we focus on what we want rather than getting what we most need. And in a tough situation, you may want the ideal thing to happen. You may want the perfect thing to go. You may want this tough situation to go away completely. But when you focus on the thing you want rather than the thing you need, that keeps you from getting the lesson. So in any tough situation, when fear is creeping up and this sense of gloom and doom is setting in, I want you to remember that the fear can be leveraged into courage if you focus on what you most need. And what you most need in a tough situation is not to be told that tough times don't last, but tough people do. What you need is to remember that this is a spiritual classroom. You came here to master a spiritual lesson. Your only role in this situation is not to fight it, not to complain about it, not to get bogged down into depression and sadness about it. Get the lesson. Get the lesson. Because I'll tell you what, the lesson for me from going to, 4 years of infertility, finally getting pregnant with a baby, having a premature baby, baby stays in the hospital 2 weeks, 3 months later, the baby back in the hospital. The lesson for me was that I was strong enough to handle the second time. The first time I fell apart. The first time when a doctor came in and said, this baby you've been waiting 4 years for is probably never going to be normal, never going to do all the things that children do, born premature. Like, I freaked out. I literally freaked out. But let me tell you what, that spiritual classroom set me up beautifully for the second time when I was bringing a 3-month-old who was almost blew into the emergency room. And the doctors looked at me and said, he might not make it. You see, because I was so strong from the first lesson that there was nothing anybody was going to say to me that was going to put me on the ground, on the floor. I knew he was going to make it because the strength I built in the first lesson of him being born premature built within me the courage I needed for the second. And so if you're going through a tough time, here's what I want you to remember. Forget the whole tough times don't last, but tough people do crap. Remember that your fear is the thing that you can transform into your courage. And the goal is not to fight the situation. The goal is to get out of it what you most need. And that is get the lesson. Get the lesson. Tough times, they suck. But your role in the tough time is to remember that all things happen for you and not to you. Your only job in this situation, whatever it is to get the lesson. All right, everybody, Cassandra Bibas here, your Fear to Fuel expert. Listen, I have got 10 tips to transform your fear. The link is going to be at the end of this video, so click it. Join me. 10 tips. Really great tip sheet. You want it? Download it. Join me. All right, I'll talk to you next week.